Hey, hello. Oh, not so loud. Hi, and welcome to my session about monitoring with Azure and Grafana. My name is Daniel Lee. I'm a developer at a company called Grafana Labs that builds Grafana. My background is that I was a .NET developer for 10 years. The last 2 years, I've been working mostly with Go and Node. And I'm from Ireland. So this is my third time speaking at Swaytug, but the first time in English. So it's a bit strange, actually. So I hope you can all understand my Irish accent. And if you want to talk to me, then Twitter is the best way to contact me. I'm Dan Limerick on Twitter, and Limerick is where I come from in Ireland. It's not that I like limericks. I'd love to get a poll here about how people do their monitoring. So can put hands up who uses Application Insights. Lots. And hands up who uses Azure Monitor. Ooh, 0. Interesting. But before, and later on we're going to talk about like all these tools and technical stuff, but I want to start with what's really important, and that's like the principles behind this. So I'm going to start like, what is monitoring? We have like this long Wikipedia definition here, but a simpler definition is what's broken and why. I'm going to specifically talk about whitebox monitoring, because monitoring is quite a broad term. So I think black box monitoring is you don't know what the internals. It's like user testing. You press a button, it either works or doesn't. But whitebox, you get like a look inside. So both whitebox and black box monitoring answer the first part of that definition. Is it broken? But only whitebox monitoring can say like why. So that's that. And then whitebox monitoring helps you to debug why it failed. And whitebox monitoring also comes with an extra added bonus, and that's future trends. So you can detect future problems before they happen. So you can prevent outages. Black box monitoring is always reactive. Whitebox monitoring can be proactive. I can also help you with things like capacity planning. So why do we monitor our system? This is like the biggest one. If you're not doing monitoring today, fix problems before your customers tell you about it. I mean, if your customers are ringing you up and saying, I can't place an order, then you're not doing monitoring. Another big thing is quality. So maybe our site is up and it's sort of working, but we want to be able to prove to our stakeholders, to the business people in our company, that we're actually providing some sort of quality in our service, that users can do what they're supposed to do in our system. For some companies, outage costs can be really, really high. So I used to work at an auction site. An outage on a Sunday will cost millions of kroner. It can also gain insights. So it's one thing developing code on your machine in development environment. It's a totally different thing how it actually performs in production. So when you're doing your user testing, maybe you're not doing what users actually do. So this whitebox monitoring comes with an added feature that you can gain insights and see how it actually performs. And you can make decisions based on data instead of hunches. So you can come up with a theory, and then you can prove it or disprove it with data. Unfortunately, these days are over. I think most of my career, actually, I haven't deployed the code I've written. I threw it over the wall and gave it to an ops person and said, deploy this for me. In some places, I wasn't even allowed anywhere near a production server. You literally, had to bundle it up with instructions on how to install it and hope that the ops person understood it. I also never got paged when my system crashed. So if the database went down or there was some bug that took everything down, I didn't get called in the middle of the night. But there's two big things that have changed in the last couple of years. And the first one is cloud and container technology. They just totally changed the way we write software and the way we deploy software. So as a developer, we start talking about full stack developers. You're already from the first stage, involved in how is this going to be deployed. I mean, especially in Azure. You can't just literally, throw your code over the wall and say it works on my machine. I'm sure it'll be fine in Azure. And the other big sea change is agile and lean. So we want to know how our customers are doing. So I mean, previous jobs I've had, I had no idea how it was used. How many page views per page, or which parts of the functionality were used and which parts weren't. And now we really want this feedback, which means that I have to know how my code performs in production. And that means in 2018, professional software developers do monitoring. Do you know if your system is running? Is anybody ringing you up and saying your system is down? Do you know how your users are doing? What's the user experience? I mean, step for step, how are all your user flows? And the last one, do you know how many users are affected by errors? If you have a service that goes down in Azure, do you know what sort of cost this has? I mean, have you lost the income for the company, or lost users? And the other important thing with monitoring is alerting. And that goes hand in hand with the first one. So knowing about when your stuff breaks before your users do. And there are a couple of things to be aware of. Alert on symptoms and not causes. And this isn't as straightforward as it sounds, because at the start, I think when we started alerting, it was alerting on causes all the time. I have some part of the system, you say, when it gets up to this value, then we should send an alert, because most of the time, that means something's wrong. The problem with that is that it's very flappy. So maybe there's some exception, it's a bank holiday weekend, or there's a different pattern, and it's not really an exception, or not really an alert, and this causes false positives, which means that people stop looking at the alerts. So I'm not going to talk too much about this, but this is based on Google's 4 golden signals, and it's saying that basically if you get a ton of errors, then something is wrong. If your site starts going slow, then something is wrong. And if you get sort of more advanced level, then you can look at something called saturation, and that's when you know your system very well. You know that, when this gets up to 90%, then we're going to have trouble soon. And things like that would be disk usage. So you do not want to wait until your disk is 100% full. That is definitely a symptom, but you do actually, in that case, want to alert on a cause and say, when it's 90% full, I want to know, and not wait for the symptoms. But it's a general rule of thumb. And the other part of monitoring is application metrics. And this is something you have to do yourself. You have to instrument your code. It's nothing you can't just buy in a tool and say, I have application metrics. It's about knowing what's important in your system. So when I was working at an auction site, it was bids per minute, or total value of bids per minute. And that was like the business metric that everything flowed out of. So you can also measure the quality of service. You can see things like a drop-off on sign-up, or how many people add something to their shopping cart but never actually buy it. Advantages of this are that it allows the business to make good decisions. I think lots of businesses are still making guesses. We think this is what our customers want. We think this will make us successful. But with application metrics, you can actually see. And you can measure the value delivered, or you can also measure the value lost. If you have an outage, you can go to your manager and say, this is what it cost. We lost this much money because an Azure VM crashed. Maybe we need to have a look and improve that part of the code. It also informs technology decisions. So rather than just having sort of feel for how we should be working more and refactoring this part of the code base, you can actually see which parts of the code base are being used the most, which ones you should be focusing on. So that was the important bit. So I hope you remember all that. Now it's just tech and tools, and basically how to do this monitoring. I'm going to focus on Grafana and Azure. So this is like just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more. I'm sure that not everyone is just doing everything in Azure. I'm sure you have lots of other systems as well. But I'm just going to focus on the Azure part today. So what is Grafana? How many people here know what Grafana is? Okay, and how many people here use it? Okay, cool. So Grafana is a visualization tool for time series data. So the special part of this is the time series data part. So a time series, if no one remembers from school, is basically data over time. So if you think of something like a weather report with temperatures, is typical time series data. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, it says 10 degrees, 11 o'clock, 11 degrees, 12 o'clock, 12 degrees. It's like a trend over time. And you could do lots of things with that data. I mean, that's for one day, but you could have like temperature, average temperature per day, and show a month. You can compare, February of 2018 with February of 2017, and it's trends. It's very powerful. It's a very powerful visualization tool. And this is what Grafana looks like. You have a dashboard with panels, and the bread and butter is the graph panel showing the data over time. But we have lots of other. This is only 2 types of panels. There are like 40 or something types of panels. It has a white theme as well. It has some inbuilt alerting, but not for the Azure stuff yet. That's on my to-do list. You can also do a bit of logs. It's not maybe its strong point. If anyone knows Kibana, then Kibana is sort of mostly focused on logs with a bit of time metrics. Grafana is the other way around. Grafana is mostly time series with a bit of logging. Just going to talk briefly about the Grafana project because it seems like there's a lot of you that have never heard of it. So it was built 4 years ago here in Sweden. It's open source, Apache license. It's one of the biggest projects on GitHub. I think it's top 50. 20,000 stars and 3,500 forks. So we get tons and tons of PRs. And just the last year, it has totally exploded. So we had around 50,000 installations 400 days ago. Now we're up to 130,000. So that's from, I think, 200,000 users approximately to 1.7 million. And that is very, very conservative because this is an open source project, so we don't send loads of metrics. So we have like one call home feature that fires off once a day. You can turn it off, and if you're behind a firewall, we'll never get it. So we reckon it could be 20-30% higher. So I suppose the first question to answer is why Grafana? If you have Azure and you have Application Insights and you have it has some graphs and things, but it's not like a real visualization tool. So Grafana is that's what it does. It doesn't have a database or anything. It is just a visualization layer. So there's much more visualization options on the Azure portal. It supports multiple data sources, so which means that you can combine data from multiple data sources in the same dashboard. So if you have a help desk system or like anything, it has loads of plugins for different data sources. You can combine them in the same dashboard and really like show what's important to you. And alerting. And very, very importantly, it looks good in the TV. And it's actually sort of part of the secret to why it's got so big. That's what makes it viral. You put it up on your TV and suddenly everyone's going, oh, what's that? And other teams start adopting it. I was thinking that actually one of you would already be using Azure Monitor, but obviously not. It is absolutely huge. So it is the single source for monitoring Azure resources. So it basically is a wrapper around every single Azure service that there is. So they're all, I think they're still working on it, but all the big services anyway save their metrics to Azure Monitor. And it's basically a specialized time series database that Microsoft have built themselves, and you has an API over it, so you can get your metrics out. So you can see in the portal, if you click on Monitor, it's called Monitor now, not Azure Monitor anymore, in the portal. It looks like that. It looks very, very basic in the portal, but it's hiding like how much there is under it. So anything, blob storage, any service you can think about, they all expose metrics which you can use to monitor them. So Microsoft basically contacted us and said, would we be interested in helping them build an integration for Grafana? So they financed the first part, so it was me that built it. It was very interesting, so I got to talk to the Application Insights team and I think 3 or 4 different teams within Azure. And this is maybe a hint, if you're an Application Insights user, this is a hint of like where Application Insights is going. So they really wanted to combine Application Insights and Azure Monitor in the same plugin. They didn't want them separate, they want them together. And I think I just noticed the other week that in the portal, Application Insights has moved in under Azure Monitor. And if you're looking for this, by the way, and you have Swedish on, it's called Övervaka. I think I was searching for about 5 minutes. I thought I'd forgotten to pay some bill or something. Where's my Azure Monitor? Okay, this is a sort of a hint for myself. So the hardest part of actually setting this up in Grafana is the data source settings. So you need like 4 pieces of information for Azure Monitor. So Application Insights is really, really easy. It's like one key and then you're done. Azure Monitor, you have to mess around with Azure Active Directory and service principles and everything. And it worked first time for me fine in the portal, click, 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 and follow the instructions. And then I made a change to my subscription, and like nothing worked anymore. And I was like clicking around for ages. And I'm not an Azure MVP by any means, so I'm much more on the Grafana side. But using the Azure client tool was like far easier than clicking around the portal. So it's literally a one-liner. The last bit you can switch out for your own website, but if you get stuck with that and just can't authenticate, install the Azure CLI and create your service principal that way. It was much easier than clicking around the UI. So this plugin, it doesn't save data anywhere. So there's 2 ways to do this. You could also save this into a specialized database, pull the data from Azure and save it. You would have it locally. But that, especially if you're talking about a cloud service, that means you're storing the same data twice. So this just goes against the Azure Monitor REST API, and it costs about 0.079 kroners per 1,000 calls. So I think in the Grafana UI, I know you have to be doing a lot of refreshing to up to 1,000. Maybe you have on refresh every 10 seconds for a whole day. I suppose you'll get up to a few thousand, but that would maybe cost you 1 kroner or so. So I think it's pretty cheap, and you have a max, I think, of 1 million standard API calls per month, which should be plenty. So I think we're just going to switch now and actually show a bit of Grafana. So I'm hoping everything's going to work. So this is a dashboard from Azure Monitor for virtual machines. So I have a virtual machine set up with hosted Grafana. And you can, as I said, the API is huge. We'll start here. So it's a dashboard. It's made up of panels. These panels can be like moved around. And you can add new ones. There's lots and lots of panels. And you can click on the title here, and there's an edit option. Get authorized, exciting. I have internet still. And then basically every data source, that's what we call them, data sources, these integrations, have different query editors. So if you have using like SQL, for example, you get something that's more suited to SQL, whereas Azure Monitor, this is basically how you can interact with the API. And it's a series of drop-downs. So you can choose like resource group, all the different things that are connected to that resource group, resource name, and then all the metrics. It has some more advanced stuff here as well. So you can choose aggregation. So the service actually chooses out the default one. So every metric has a default aggregation. So maybe you don't have to think about that too much to start with. But it's something you have to be careful with. It's easy to choose the wrong aggregation and be showing incorrect data. I mean, averages, for example, can hide lots of things. Especially if you're talking like large ranges, then you maybe want to sort of think about maybe how can I show this a different way. And this time grain, the minimum for Azure Monitor is 1 minute. So if there are 100 calls, you don't see all 100, they're aggregated to 1 minute. So you get like for every minute, it'll say, 100 calls. Next minute, 200 calls. That's quite fine-grained if you're looking for a longer period. This is the last 6 hours, and it's fine. But I might want to smooth that out and just have it less jumpy, especially if I zoom out a bit. Then you might have like work per hour. So if I zoom out, for example, if I had 1 minute, that would be sort of very hard to see anything. So that's why you want to maybe have an hour. Oops. And then you right click here. And then you can zoom in again on a part that's interesting if you want to, like this. And the other thing that's interesting here, especially for later on, is there is something called the query inspector here, where you can see actually what's getting sent to Azure, and the raw data can be useful, especially if you were doing some integration yourself or just want to see like what the actual raw data that is being returned. Has useful things like this bit is quite interesting with the unit. So it's something you're going to build in hopefully to future integration, is that it will actually take this unit and set it automatically on the graph. It's a little bit difficult because I have to do some sort of translation there. So you can see on the axis here you can choose like which unit you want. So it's sort of manual at the moment, but there are a lot of options there. So in this case, this is percentage. So 0 to 100. So my virtual machine is not doing a lot. Basically, it's on less than 1% of the CPU. So this is going back to what we were talking about, the RED or things you want to monitor. You have like disk network and a percentage CPU. So it's sort of dangerous settings. So percentage CPU is a very good example of saturation. So you do want to use lots of CPU, but there is like some sort of limit, and you have to sort of get to know that. It's hard to know. So 90% is fine as long as it's very stable. 90%. If it's spiking up to 100 all the time, then your customers are probably having problems, and it really depends on what workload you have. So it's hard to give any sort of specific advice about what isn't important. But yeah, just keep an eye on errors, and things like seeing like how much traffic there is will give you an indication like, whoa, this is a virtual machine is getting way more traffic than is should be possible. So am I getting hacked, or is there some denial of service attack or something like that? And then just another example of a Azure storage. So like availability, 100%, looks great. This is for the blob storage. For some reason I have no... Oh, okay, I have no egress. And there's another feature we're going to talk about in a minute, and that in Grafana, and that is variables. So the problem with this is actually a totally new feature that I'm just building in, so it's not released, but probably will do it tomorrow. I was planning to do it today, but it didn't happen. And at the moment, people are like generating their dashboards automatically. So if you have lots and lots of servers, then it's like, oh, I want a dashboard per server. And there's actually an easier way to do it in Grafana, and that is with variables. So you can do a query for these drop downs here, and I can query like all my resource groups, and then that appears as a drop down, and I can show you how we use that then. So I can show the variable first. So my resource groups, it's basically this query saying Azure Monitor resource groups, and returns this list down here. And this is something that I'm basically making up. So if you think SQL has a query language, but the Azure Monitor REST API doesn't have a query language yet. So I'm just basically saying, yeah, write this query like this. Azure Monitor resource groups will return a list of resource groups. I'll show a bit more of that later on. And then once you have this drop down, you can use it here instead of choosing something from drop down here. You can just write in $, is the what you have before it, and then I the name of my variable is RG for resource group. I have one for resource name as well there, which means that instead of having to go into the query and change it, I can make them totally dynamic. If possible. For example, there for my hosted Grafana blob. That's for my other Grafana blob storage. And these can be like multi as well, so you can show like multiple things as well, if that makes sense. This was just in case it didn't work. Just going to do like a quick part of Application Insights. I was sort of planning actually just to have very little bit about this, but it was weighted totally different from what I thought. So I think most of you actually know what this is, Application Insights. So it's instrumentation for live web applications. Comes with loads and loads of good stuff. It's great to hear that most of you are using it, so that you actually do know how your customers are doing. And say with Grafana, Grafana is not like replacing Application Insights in any way at all. It is mostly focused on the metrics part of it, so not the analytics part of it. And the idea is that if you want to, get a better dashboard, take your Application Insights data and mix it with something from Azure or some other data, then you can do this in Grafana. So it's sort of similar to the Azure Monitor. It has a metrics REST API. Their demo site for testing out is excellent. If you actually want to do stuff yourself directly against the Application Insights API, their demo site is far better than the Azure Monitor one. And it's actually totally different as well from Azure Monitor. And this is something that's probably going to change, is my impression. So I think I was talking to Robert there, and he was saying that just as a user, the interface is changing all the time. And my understanding is that Microsoft bought Application Insights and they are integrating it into Azure Monitor. So you will probably get to know Azure Monitor more and more. It's really easy to set up. You just need to set up an API key and with the read telemetry permission. So you can show this as well, but it's very similar. If you've ever used the analytics view of Application Insights, then this will look very familiar. App Insights. So this is using basically the graph panel and the single stat, and I have a variable for different group buys, which can be very interesting. So if you want to see maybe cities, or if you're a global company, maybe you want to know by server or by URL path, can be very interesting. See, how many requests are we getting for every URL path that our website exposes? We can see a duration here, and say, whoa, we have some outliers here, 15 seconds. We see most stuff is fine down here. So we can zoom in a bit. My resolution is huge. Look at just this. And you see like nearly everything is on 0 milliseconds, but you can see that like some things totally sorry, my resolution is usually better than this. There's something going on with my resolution here. We should be able to see on a normal screen what is causing the problem here. And you can also like choose stuff from the legend if you want to look at just one special route. And there are lots of different visualization options here. So I'm using points here. I could be using lines if I wanted. And you can, I think it's a very, very important part of Grafana that you try and make the data that you have stand out. So you can use like Siri override. So I was using that to show the average line. So I'm going to say, I have all these points, all these different cities, or all these different URLs, but here's my average, and you can sort of overlay it. And so the sort of thing that makes a difference, makes the data stand out. And that's, I think, what's the strong side of Grafana. So this integration is still very, very new. Just released it. So I have lots of things I want to do with it, but I think like already it can do some things that you can't do in the portal, and that is you can mix Application Insights and Azure Monitor in the same graph, even if I want to. I can add a query here with Azure Monitor and choose something if I want to. Yeah, I think I said this already, that it just added templating with variables, and it's something that also is quite unique. It's something you can't really do in the portal, make them dynamic. I just added them. So if anyone's using it, I'd love some feedback on template variables. It's sort of hard actually to know, especially for Azure Monitor. I think I have a better idea with Application Insights where I want to go. About like what exactly do you want to be able to choose as a drop-down? What do you actually want to use as variables? It's just so big, there's just so much there. So I'm just trying to pick out like what's important to people. So this is what the variable queries look like at the moment. So literally started working on this week. So I only have 2 so far for Application Insights. I think I'm going to have to add in some sort of filtering as well. More like the Query Explorer to make this more useful. And for Azure Monitor I have 3 so far, but I think I know I have at least another 5 I'm going to do. But then after that I'd love some feedback from people. This is a rough roadmap for the plugin. So the first thing is what I'm working on now, the variable support. Grafana has a feature called annotations as well, where you can mark events. So you can query the database maybe for some sort of event like data, like an outage or a release maybe, and annotate the graph with it. I've already got this feature request several times. I had no idea actually before I started this that Azure has so many sovereign clouds. It's amazing. Azure Germany is like one of 20 or something. That's like, I don't know, not the standard Azure, but there's like special Azure for Germany and other different countries, and I don't know, it seems to be also for different industries as well. So it's amazing. Alerting support I'm also looking to add, and the app sites query API support is also next on the list. If you want to get started with this, it's very easy. You can either, if you don't want to install anything yourself, you can sign up for Grafana.com. We have Grafana Cloud there. I can actually, it's the same thing. It's Grafana, but in the cloud. You can host it yourself. It's very easy to install on Windows. There is an Azure Marketplace template as well if you want to actually host it in an Azure VM. And if you want to get started with, especially the Azure Monitor part, the Application Insights is so custom. I think you just have to make your own dashboards there. It's what's important for you. But for the Azure part, there is this guy who has written this tool that polls the Azure API and picks out all your different metrics that you have and creates dashboards for them. So hopefully I'm going to make his life easier with template variables now. So then we're going to go on to the tech demo part of it. And I might lose some of you here because this is going to get a bit more technical. We're going to sort of dig into what time series is. But one of Grafana's strengths is that it can combine different sources. So there are lots of specialized time series databases like InfluxDB and Prometheus. They work great on Windows. And there's lots of external plugins, so maybe you won't have to do this at all. Maybe you'll just be able to use what's there already. But I think nearly everybody has like some in-house system that you want to integrate in and show on a dashboard. This is what I'm going to show now, building your own integrations. And the absolute easiest way to get started with this is something called the Simple JSON Data Source. So it's an external plugin. You have to install it. If you're doing hosted Grafana, it's basically one click. So you can go to the Simple JSON page on Grafana.com. Explains a little bit about it and has an installation tab. And if you are on hosted Grafana, there's actually an install button here. I've already done it, but one click and then it restarts your Grafana and it's ready to go within a minute. And then there's instructions here for the CLI. If you're doing it locally, if Grafana comes with a Grafana CLI tool, and you can just run this command, and then you have to restart your Grafana server. So this is an integration point for Grafana. I'm just going to show what it looks like. I was sort of debating whether I should start with the code first and then like build it up and have it like ta-da. But I think actually it'll be much easier if I start with the ta-da and work my way down. It has a simple interface and format that you need to implement. So basically what you're doing is you're taking your data from whatever system it is and transforming it into the format that Grafana expects. You're sort of mapping it to the right format. So it requires a little bit of code. So I'm going to do this in .NET Core Web API. And it's a very simple Web API backend, has 2 endpoints that basically takes in a request and returns a response. So let's make one. So the 2 endpoints are called search and query. I think we'll start and show like what those 2 endpoints do. Let's start with my discourse panel. So actually had a need for this at work. So we have a community site where people can ask questions about Grafana, and especially like the last week or so, we just put out a big release 5.0, and we're sort of falling behind with the questions a bit. And you do want to have an idea, like, how many unanswered topics we have. Are users, helping out other users enough, or do we have to, try and help the community? So I really want to get some stats out of it. So those 2 endpoints, the first endpoint, all it does is it returns this list, signups and topics. So it's just an array of 2 strings. And they're the 2 things I'm interested in, signups and topics for Discourse API. So I choose one of these, the topics, or signups. Yep, there you go, it worked. And it shows me the trends. And that's what the query endpoint does. It returns the data that you see here. So it returns time series data. And time series is basically just a pair of values, and that is a value and a timestamp. So you see this one here is 2018, 6th of February, and it is returning the value 23. And you can actually see that in the query inspector. So if I go down to the data points, this is time series data, just an array of pairs. And they're they have an order, of course, as well. So from oldest to the newest. And this here is a date in epoch format. And you might be thinking, wow, this is very Linux. The simple reason was not to have to do anything with dates in JavaScript. So we're going to dive down into some code. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, can everybody see that? One more. Okay, wow, this is huge for me. I think we'll start with my discourse one. So this is actually with real data. So you see, this is my search endpoint, and it is really super simple. Just hard-coded a list of strings. And how I got these was by first just doing a call against the Discourse API. I just had to look around first, say, what do I need? And I wanted something called global reports, and has a type. So then I just basically took further down. There's a type called signups, and there's one called topics. You could do this, I don't know, depending on how complicated it is, but basically all it is returning is a list of the things, the different metrics that you want to look at. It's very simple. And they were the only 2 I was interested out of that whole long JSON file. And then the query basically is doing a HTTP client here with my secret API key, which you can see half of. I think I might have to change it after this. And it's just here you're doing get stream async, and then has some JSON serialization. And this was actually the part of the code that took by far the longest. The actual Grafana bit was really easy. So I had to create a model with some data member types and things. But I'm sure if you're using Yeah. Oh, thank you, Tim. Yeah. A better JSON library, then this is even easier. So then what I'm doing is I have to turn it into time series data. And this is this function here. So basically, show the raw data first. This is the data I get back. So I get a date, which is, it is per day. So I can't get any finer than that. And a value. So it's already sort of time series data. This bit can be more or less work depending on what the data looks like. This bit can be quite a lot of work if you need to get into the right form, depending on how it looks. In this case, it was easy. And then I'm just returning basically an array of arrays. So an array of pairs. So here is my array of arrays. And here I'm creating like each pair. So I'm just taking the value I get in that field called y. And this is maybe an interesting part. I'm parsing the date time, that string, into a date time first, and then into a date time offset, because date time offset has this 2 Unix time milliseconds, which is this epoch date, which we need. So I think that's pretty much the only sort of maybe unusual thing you have to remember. The dates should be in that format. And that's like all it was to get that into Grafana. You can do more though, so that was very simple data. It was like per day. So I actually started with a fake data source. The search is very similar. I'm going to actually just have a look at that in Grafana. I'll go into this. Okay. Zoom in a bit. I seem to have some sort of bug. Cut off the end. Yeah, basically the same. I have like test 1 and test 2. You can have multiple queries, so if you have to handle multiple queries. And I suppose this is maybe the hard part about the query part is actually the model for taking the JSON request that you get from Grafana for the query, and you basically turn that into C#. If you ever do this, you can just basically copy this. So query request returns things like the range, which is the from and the to. That's what you choose in the top right hand corner. Say last 7 days, or you can choose 2 dates. And the other interesting part is the targets. And that is basically for every query that you have there. There's multiple. You can have as many queries as you want. Or you have, 26. That's a lie. We have A to Z. And a query returns whatever you chose in that drop down. So in this case, it would be test 1. In this case, it would be test 2. The ref ID is A or B. And the type is either time series or table. So you can return it as a table, or log data. Won't be showing that today, but it's pretty simple. In this case, I'm just generating some fake data. And I'm just looping through these targets, and I'm just checking whether the target is the same as test 1 or test 2. And in my discourse case, I was checking whether it was equal to signups or topics. And maybe the other interesting thing here was the other data that Grafana returns to you. So if I, for example, had hard-coded this to be 1 minute, then it's fine if I'm looking at the last hour. But if I zoom out, say look at the last year, then it just, you can't see anything. It's like this graph that looks like that. So you want to aggregate, like I showed before, you want to smooth it out. And Grafana actually gives you some data. So if you think about this graph here, it's actually a number of pixels. So you can move it, you can see like every pixel. And you can't show more data than there are pixels. So that's called max data points. It's like how many pixels are there actually. You can't show it more fine-grained than that. So we'll actually give you that information. Say you have this many data points. So somewhere here I am using that. Oh yeah, so there. So and it gives you like the minimum interval then in milliseconds. So I might say like 1 second or maybe 1 hour, depending on how much you zoom out. So if you're zoomed in and looking at the last 5 minutes, that interval milliseconds will be very, very low. If you zoomed out and looked at 3 years, then that interval will be much higher. It might be like 1 week. Depends on how many points you can show. So you can use that to sort of automatically aggregate your data, like an automatic sort of time grain, which I do here. So basically just when I'm calculating the date for my fake data, I'm just saying, oh, how many data points I have, and multiply it by the interval. So more advanced stuff. But I mean, I think the first one, this will get you pretty far. This is what you want for most data. You don't need to be able to zoom in, zoom out that much. It just be, if it's like help desk errands per day, you can get that up in your dashboard, no problem. So these are the classes, so they're in the slides later on if you need them. So wrapping up, professional developers monitor their systems. If you take anything from this talk, it's that. Azure Monitor and Application Insights, they are great tools in your toolbox if you're working with Azure to be able to do that. Grafana is a visualization tool, helps you focus on what's important, it helps you be more proactive. So you have like tons of data out there. I'm sure you're all drowning in it. So pick out the most important bits and visualize it. And democratize your metrics. So don't hide your data in these huge data silos. Just put them on a TV, show them to everyone you're working with. You can show your manager, this is how much an outage cost, or this is how much value we're bringing in. And finally, I just want to say, as I know this is going to be played on YouTube later on, and my son loves YouTube, and it's his birthday today, so I just want to say happy birthday, Sam. And I'll show this to you on YouTube later on. We have our own conference in Amsterdam the start of March. And if you want to go to that, then we have a €50 discount, and there is a discount code there. SwayTug18. Which should be pretty big. Lots of big names like Tinder is going to be there, and eBay, and Bloomberg, and loads of big companies. And there's lots of resources. You can get Grafana and Grafana.com. You can also find the cloud there. We have a play site if you just want to play around with fake data. Play.grafana.org. Microsoft has some documentation on getting started with Grafana as well. And of course, we're on GitHub and Twitter as well. That was it for me. Thanks.